since the role of realtors has been evolving over time, realtors don't always adjust.
And this is a market where I believe negotiations are happening.
Critical.
Yes. And yeah, I think there are ways to do that better and worse potentially, right? And certainly it always is your specific negotiation, your specific seller, your specific buyer.
Right.
But there's some stuff I want to chat about.
This is Las Vegas Real Estate Now with local real estate expert Harvey Blankfeld.
So where I initially thought about this was I've seen some contracts recently where my buyers have gone out, written a contract to purchase a house. They've asked for their terms. They asked for their agent to be paid for. They asked for some closing cost help, and they made an offer price on the house that was close to the list price.
Right.
Our team got a counter offer back from the seller. They reviewed our offer, came back, and basically started to respond to what we requested. And it was a little bit yes and a lot of bit no.
Right. Okay.
And so I was thinking about, like, how do you advise people and measure the circumstance on whether you should stop at that first response from the seller, or whether you keep grinding at it? And then how do agents, or how should agents be thinking about where to draw the lines and pick and choose their battles, so to speak?
Okay, I think it's a great question, and it's a little bit tough to answer, but not really. So each deal is unique, each deal is different.
Sure.
But when I'm working with a buyer and we prepare an offer, we're preparing an offer that we almost anticipate there's going to be some kind of a counter. Not all these terms are going to be agreeable to the seller. Maybe it's the price, maybe it's other things, whatever it is. But we're going to write an offer that's going to make us happy as a buyer, make my buyer happy. Let's write an offer that's going to make you happy, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Let's write something that you're comfortable with, and maybe anticipate perhaps the seller's not going to like every element of it, and you can decide whether or not you agree with their change or not when it comes back to you. But oftentimes now what's happening, you talked about some of the terms, and it's interesting, you mentioned very specific terms within that, being buyer's closing costs and helping out with the buyer's agent, and then of course the price. Those are the three big numbers in the transaction.
Right.
And what I've seen a lot of late is where sellers feel compelled to counter back the amount of money they're contributing towards the buyer's agent.
So I see this, yes.
This has been happening quite a bit since it's been a change and it's new and so forth.
I'm pointing the finger at the agent on the other side.
I
have a hard time believing that all these sellers are saying, no, I don't want to pay that. I want to pay this instead.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it is, but it can be. And I think because sellers read the paper, and in the paper it might have said, you don't have to pay buyer's agents anymore. So they may be thinking, gee, do I really have to do that? Let's do that. But here's my advice to a seller would be simply this. Look, let's not attack that number. Let's attack the sale price instead and make you happier with that. Because you know what? If we lower the sale price, that changes a lot more than just the commission. That also changes your transfer tax. That changes your escrow fee. It lowers your expenses. If we can lower the overall price instead of chopping at that number, it's actually better for the seller. If you're saying, I'm going to chop that number by, let's just say, by $5,000. I want to take $5,000 off that buyer's commission.
Yes.
If I do that, that's one thing. That's $5,000 less I have to pay at closing. But if I take $5,000 off the sale price, I not only take that $5,000 off of what, if I increase the price by $5,000.
I was trying to follow you there.
Yeah, if I increase the price by $5,000 instead of reducing that, we're impacting a variety of things. So I guess in that sense, it's a challenge to the seller to decide what they want to do. They want to cut costs, they want to increase price. But the truth of the matter is that going after just the commission is not always going to work for them.
Yeah.
And if the buyer is committed to that number, if the buyer is signed a contract, which they have, and if the agent's asking for that number to match, now if you say no, now the buyer has to come out of pocket to do that.
Right.
And that's the most important element.
Which is, that's like moving mountains for a buyer, saying, you come up with an extra $5,000 out of your pocket, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, right?
Yeah.
That's a substantial thing versus, hey, pay $5,000 more for my property, and I'll pay that $5,000 to your agent, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
that's a much smaller impact on the buyer's finances,
right? Yeah,
at least in the short run.
Indeed. And so sometimes I've heard buyers ask for closing costs just because they want to.
Okay.
Not because they need to.
Okay.
And that's another thing I would say to buyers.
I'm in favor of that. I'm totally fine with that.
Okay, I know you are.
Because it's your job to say yes or no to what I'm offering you, right?
Indeed.
I'm the one who's starting the process out.
But here's the thing I would say to a buyer is that you're not going to trick, the seller's not going to be fooled by that. Say, I'm getting my big number. Right. Now, some sellers are. Now, the most important number to the seller more times than not is that sale price, and not always the net, which is unfortunate, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's like they like to
Wrong-headed.
boast to the neighbors, "Hey, I got this number."
Yeah.
They don't tell them that I had to give the buyer an extra $15,000 to do it, but that's the number I got.
Sure.
And sometimes that's important, and I understand that. But it's not. What's most important to a seller should be that check at close of escrow.
Right.
That's the number that should really matter.
Yeah. If you owned 3 houses side by side on the very same street, like literally next to each other, now what I sell my house for really matters to me.
Yeah.
Because I have other houses that are going to be valued based upon that sale.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah.
But if I'm leaving the neighborhood, what do I care?
Indeed.
I'm focused on the bottom line. And
Right.
that's the way things work.
And that's the way it should be. We should be, and that's why we don't focus on who the buyer or what the buyer is. We don't care as long as the check cashes at escrow.
So in your sort of philosophy, or in your, let's say, your baseline case, how much back and forth is appropriate versus too much?
Okay, that's a great question, because I have this, my years of experience have taught me that in Nevada, in Southern Nevada, in Las Vegas market, normally we never go beyond 2 counters. It's an offer, a counter, maybe a second counter, and then that's usually it. That's as far as we're going to end up going, because it's hard for us to bring the parties back together. Now, in other markets, and I'm not going to say which, but some markets, they may be going back 6, 7, 8 times, and that may be the case. But here, it's usually 1, 2, and it's done, or it's not.
I've certainly seen, and there's nuances and details for all these transactions, but I've seen 3, 4, and 5.
It does happen.
Not uncommon. Usually they're evolutionary. They're not counter offers. They're addendums, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's very common. Then that can happen. And once you're in the transaction, you realize something has to be changed in order for me to proceed, or whatever. Either side might come to that. The seller may need to change something about, title or whatever it is. Sometimes things have to change, and there needs to be an addendum. So that does happen too. But normally the counters and addendums are, to me, are 2 completely different things.
Okay.
One's before you're in escrow, one's after you're in escrow. And so when I'm saying about counters now, having said that, I've been involved in transactions where there are, 4, 5, 6, 7 counter offers. It does happen, but it's rare. It's in my experience. It rarely goes beyond 2. So my advice, when I'm talking with counseling a seller, for instance, I might say to the seller, let's counter at a price and terms that you're satisfied. Should the buyer walk away, you did the best you're willing to do right now.
Right.
Right now. Now, that may change 3 weeks from now when we're not seeing a lot of activity. But right now, this is the best you're prepared to do, because we don't want to count on them coming back again. I don't want to. And if they come back and we don't like it, we're just going to say no. I mean, that's all. That's what we have to do.